It was just another average day at work for Victoria Blake. As the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, she was revered for her strength, grace, and unwavering determination. Victoria had worked tirelessly to establish her business from the ground up, gaining every bit of her success by sheer ambition and hard labor. Her presence commanded respect everywhere she went. Employees struggled to match her high standards, and her bright mind made her a formidable force in business. Victoria appeared indestructible to those around her. However, beneath her polished veneer was a truth that few, if any, knew. Victoria kept a secret deep within her heart. It was an aspect of her life she never talked about, a decision she'd made years ago and kept hidden in the back of her mind. Little did she know that secret was about to resurface in the most unexpected way, upending her world and forcing her to confront a history she believed she had left behind. In the heart of Victoria's thriving workplace, where deals were negotiated and fortunes were made, there was another figure, someone who went silently, almost unnoticed, through the company's great halls. He was a young boy, no older than 16, clothed in a modest uniform and holding a mop. His name was Ethan. Ethan was the type of person who blends into the background. He said little, worked hard, and never brought attention to himself. Day after day, he scrubbed the floors, emptied garbage cans, and kept the area pristine for folks who barely saw him. To the majority, he was just another employee, a cleaner guy doing his job. People went past him without a second glance, too preoccupied with their own busy lives to notice his existence. But Ethan did not appear to mind. He kept his head down and worked with calm resolve. Little did anyone realize, especially Victoria, that this seemingly ordinary boy had a connection with her that would soon change everything. One morning, Victoria marched into the office, her heels clacking against the marble floor. Her mind was a blur of deadlines, meetings, and vital decisions that required her attention. She was stressed, fatigued, and carried the responsibility for her company's success on her shoulders. As she made her way to her office, her keen eyes noticed Ethan, the young cleaner, working hard in the corridor. He was preoccupied with his duty, carefully washing the floor, entirely ignorant of Victoria's hasty approach. But for Victoria, his presence was nothing more than a nuisance. His mop sprawled across the hallway, obstructing her path. Frustration boiled up instantly. Without thinking, she snapped. Her voice, strong and demanding, rang down the corridor. "Can't you tell I'm rushing? Move this out of the way." Ethan froze, surprised by her tone. His hands grasped the mop hard as he took a rapid step back, his head lowering in silence. Victoria did not spare him another glance. She hurried past him, her attention already returning to the important business of the day, ignorant of the significance of what had just occurred. Ethan, shocked by the abrupt outburst, stepped aside, his hands trembling as he held the mop. His cheeks reddened from humiliation, but he kept his head down and said nothing. Victoria, on the other hand, turned away without looking back. She didn't stop to apologize or recognize the boy she had just reprimanded. To her, it was a small nuisance, hardly worth considering. Her thoughts was already rushing forward, preoccupied with the day's numerous jobs and responsibilities. She hurried away quickly, her attention fixated on the lofty demands of her job, fully ignorant of the impact her remarks had caused. But little did Victoria realize that the boy she had just reprimanded wasn't just any cleaner. Ethan wasn't just another employee who blended into the background of her busy office. Victoria buried herself in meetings, phone calls, and paperwork throughout the day, forgetting about the early encounter. She had no idea her life was going to be flipped upside down. Later that afternoon, as she was reviewing an important document, her phone vibrated on the desk. The name on the caller ID did not instantly register, but something about it felt strangely familiar. She responded quickly and professionally, but the words she heard on the other end of the line caused her to stop in her chair. A sudden phone call that changed everything. Victoria's helper approached her office door, her demeanor apprehensive and unsure. She gripped the clipboard hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Blake, there is someone here to see you," she explained warily. Victoria didn't look up from her desk, remained focused on her work. "I'm not accepting visitors right now," she said curtly, skimming through a stack of papers. The helper hesitated before adding, "He says he's your son." Victoria was stunned by what she had just heard. Her pen slid from her fingers, and she looked up, her expression a mix of astonishment and disbelief. "My son?" she asked, her voice barely audible, as if the words didn't make sense. Her thoughts raced, attempting to figure out what was going on. She had no children, or so she thought, and yet someone claiming to be her son was waiting just outside her office door. Victoria's heart skipped a beat. Her son. The notion appeared impossible. She had no children, at least none that she was aware of. Her job had always taken precedence over her family and personal relationships. But then her gaze shifted to the name on the caller ID, and she froze. It was a name she hadn't seen in years, one from her past that she had fought hard to forget. Her breath seized in her throat as long-buried memories surfaced. The name on the screen was more than just recognizable. It was linked to a period of her life that she had desperately sought to forget. At that point, the bustling noise of the workplace appeared to drift away, leaving just the sound of her beating heartbeat. Victoria realized this wasn't just regular call. It was the start of something she could not have imagined. As Victoria pushed open the door to the conference room, her steps slowed. There he was, Ethan, the same boy she had yelled at earlier that morning, the cleaner she had rejected without a thought. But now he wasn't holding a mop or disappearing into the background. He stood tall, his stance stable, and his gaze fixated on her. His eyes, once downcast and shy, were now filled with resolve and intense emotion. Victoria's breath hitched as she fought to comprehend what she was witnessing. Why was he here? What was happening? Before she could respond, Ethan broke the stillness. His voice was calm, yet it held the weight of years of longing and anguish. "Ms. Blake," he began, his words thoughtful. "I'm your son." The room appeared to tilt. Victoria's carefully crafted world, based on control and assurance, started to shatter. Those three words struck her like a thunderbolt, rendering her speechless and unsteady on her feet. Ethan's words lingered in the air, thick and obvious. "I am your son, Victoria." His voice quivered slightly, but his words were unmistakably true. "I've been searching for you my entire life." Victoria's thinking became blank. As she tried to make sense of what he had just said, the world around her blurred. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her thoughts were a flurry of confusion and disbelief. She stared at him, mouth dry and unable to respond. How can this be? How could the youngster she reprimanded earlier be her son? She had no recall of him, no awareness of a child she had abandoned or lost. But Ethan's eyes, filled with years of anguish and longing, conveyed a different tale. Victoria recognized that everything she believed she knew about her past was about to alter forever. Victoria stopped, her body tight as the weight of Ethan's words descended on her like a heavy fog. Her mind raced, desperate to make sense of the inconceivable reality that was unfolding in front of her. Ethan was her son, the boy she had given up for adoption many years ago. Yes, she had thought about the youngster, but she never believed he would return to her life. She had no idea he was out there, living his own life, so close but so apart from her. Her thoughts flashed back to the past, to a moment when she had taken an irreversible decision. She had been young, overwhelmed, and apprehensive about the future. She'd given him up, believing it was the greatest option for both of them. But here, standing in front of her, was the live, breathing result of that decision. A son who had spent years looking for her. Victoria felt utterly unmoored for the first time after realizing this. How did she miss this? How had she gone so long without knowing him? At that point, Victoria's emotions was divided between remorse and disbelief. Her mind was racing with questions, each more terrible than the previous. How could she have missed it? How could she have reprimanded the only person who was supposed to be her family, the child she had brought into this world and then abandoned? The shame of it hit her like a cold wave, rendering her mute. But as she looked at Ethan, she noticed something else, something she had not expected. He remained calm and composed, his expression constant despite the tempest of emotions racing inside him. However, his eyes were filled with a deep grief, a grief that conveyed the story of years spent wondering, searching, and longing for a mother who was never present. Ethan had spent his entire life wondering why mother had abandoned him, why he had been forced to grow up without her. And now, after all this time, he had discovered her. in the most unexpected and heartbreaking of circumstances. Victoria's heart ached as she grasped the extent of his pain. She had no idea how much pain he had been carrying for so long, and now standing before her was the son she had never intended to lose, the one who had been looking for her all along. Victoria's voice quivered as the weight of everything she had just learned fell on her. She reached out, her hands quivering as if to span the distance between them. I did not know. I never knew. The words felt empty and inadequate. How could she explain the years-long silence? How could she compensate for the years she had missed, the moments she would never get back? Her heart broke as she peered into Ethan's eyes, which had searched for her and bore the sorrow of abandonment. She had no idea how deep his longing was, how much he suffered every day. Victoria's mind struggled to find the perfect words, but nothing seemed adequate. She had no justifications and no means to change the past. All she could do was stand there, confronting the son she never knew she had, and the repercussions of a mistake she could never reverse. Victoria's voice quivered as she spoke, her gaze searching Ethan's face for some hint of forgiveness, some indication that this wasn't as broken as it seemed. I did not know. I never knew. Her words were hardly audible, full with sadness and perplexity. Ethan's expression softened as he drew closer, his voice steady but full of emotion. I understand, Mom. I know you didn't. He halted, his gaze locked with hers. But I've always wanted to know you, to understand why. His comments were simple, but they sliced through years of isolation and suffering. Victoria could feel the need in his eyes, the same longing that had led him to her. It wasn't hatred or animosity that filled his emotions, but a yearning desire for answers and connection. At that point, Victoria recognized that the journey ahead would not be about undoing the past. It would be about understanding, healing, and figuring out how to rebuild what had been lost. Victoria's life would never be the same. The weight of what she had just learned pressed hard against her chest. She had missed out on years of her son's life, which could never be recovered. The shame, the sorrow was crushing. How could she have been so blind? But as she looked at Ethan, she noticed something she didn't expect. Despite the anguish, the years of desire, and the unresolved questions, he was not angry, he was not bitter. Ethan, with quiet strength, was ready to forgive her. We can't alter the past, he said earlier, his voice calm yet gentle, but we can start immediately. So they embarked on the painful process of mending their relationship, one step at a time. There would be no easy solutions, no magic words to undo the years of estrangement. But in that moment, Victoria realized she had a chance to finally know her son, make up for lost time, and build a new future together. This story is more than simply an unexpected reunion. It's a reminder that life can surprise us when we least expect it. Victoria had spent so many years establishing her enterprise, chasing success, and moving up the corporate ladder. But in that moment, she discovered a terrible truth. Regardless of how successful you become, there are things more essential than business. Things that cannot be quantified in terms of profit or performance. Things like family, love, and the value of a second opportunity. Victoria's life had been defined by her ambition, but her unexpected meeting with Ethan taught her what was actually important. In the end, it was not the empire she had established that defined her. It was the relationship she had the opportunity to rebuild, the love she could offer, and the future she could now share with the son she had lost but never forgotten.